What's going on, everyone? Gareth with FCP Euro. Welcome back to another DIY video. Today, we're going to be replacing brakes on a G05 X5 on the lift behind me. So at the time of filming, the G05 X5 is the current generation of X5 SAVs, so 2019 plus model year. This is an xDrive 40i with the standard brake package. It doesn't have the M Sport upgrade, but it does have 4-piston front calipers. We're going to be installing a variety of parts today. So we have Zimmermann Z-coated rotors, ATA OEM style semi-metallic brake pads. We're going to be showing you how to do the front left, so we're going to have to replace the pad wear sensor. On this car, the pad wear sensor has been triggered, but regardless of that, you should be replacing it with a brake service anyway. And the one-time use caliper carrier bolts, which do have to be replaced per BMW instruction. So we're going to show you how to do this today. Brakes are no longer covered under BMW warranty, so even if the car is under warranty, if your brake warning is on, you are going to have to replace them. Brake services at the dealership can vary in price. I've seen several quotes upwards of several $1,000s depending on the car. Buying the parts, doing it yourself, or even having somebody else show you how to do it is a really good way to save money and maintain your car. And quite frankly, aside from tires, brakes are the next thing in line that you really want to make sure you're on top of. So with that said, let's talk about some of the tools you need to do this job. I'll go ahead and jump right into it. In order to do this brake job, you really don't need that many tools. I know it looks like there's a lot here, but really, it's not that bad. You'll want a torque wrench that can do 130 newton meters of torque. That's for the brake caliper carrier bolts. Past that, you'll need an E16 torque socket, a 6mm Allen, a 17mm socket for removing the wheels. This has to be a non-marring lug socket, a 3/8 ratchet, an 11mm wrench. Talk about that when we're in it. And you'll want your favorite tool for compressing the caliper pistons. It is a 4-piston caliper, both inboard and outboard, so you need to press them evenly. You can do this with 2 flathead screwdrivers, or you can use a nice tool like this. Because we're throwing these rotors in the trash, I don't care if it mars the brake pads or the rotor, so I'll be using this method. You'll see that shortly. Electric tools will always make the job go a little faster. You'll want 2 bleed bottles, brake parts cleaner for obvious reasons, and you'll want your favorite brake lube. Funny enough, we'll not be using the brake lube for the brake pads. I'm going to show you an alternative use. And of course, you'll want some kind of method for hanging the caliper once it's uninstalled. I have this sort of flexible coated rubber hose, which works really nice for that. So these are the tools you need. Other than that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So this car has 57,000 miles and change on it. These are the original brakes, so original rotors, original pads. Car does a lot of highway driving, so obviously the more highway driving you do, the longer the brakes are going to last. If you do a lot of city driving or you ride the brakes a lot, you're going to go through brakes a lot faster. But these are consumables. So now we have the wheel off. You can see the condition of the rotor. The stock rotor on this car is a semi-floating rotor that has an aluminum hat and a riveted on friction ring. One thing to note about this setup, BMW has had rattling issues with these rotors. So there's a service bulletin out there to install a friction ring between the rotor hat and the wheel hub. I'm installing a 1-piece solid cast rotor as an experiment to see if that actually eliminates the noise that I'm hearing. With that said, we're going to start off by removing the 6mm Allen set screw. This just holds the rotor in place. Depending on the condition of your vehicle, you might find that it's very seized. And if you're to round it off, you're going to have to go in there with a drill or take a chisel and hit the edges to get it going. But all it does is just hold the rotor in place for manufacturing purposes. And now what we'll do, move the brakes inward. This is the nice thing on the front, is you can work with the car a little bit easier as opposed to the rear, which you can't do anything with. Release our bleeder screw caps. Because the pads are junk, because the rotors are junk, I'm going to push the pads back in with 2 screwdrivers. And at the same time, I'm going to have these bleeders open with catch bottles on to push the old fluid out. That's the way that I prefer to do it. We're going to start by pushing our anti-rattle clip, which goes to the top of the pads, out the backside. So it has to go this way. So this little spring clip It's a 4-piston caliper. Normally you see the anti-rattle clip with 2 pins that you have to remove. This just kind of sits in place. So I'm going to work on pushing it out. These could be a little bit stubborn, especially if they've been in there for, in this case, almost 6 years. And they do have some spring tension on them. So again, now I'm just going to come right out. There we go. So this is the way that they slide out. This is the retention clip for the pads. If they're not in there, these will just rattle around and make noise. But they're going to be removed by going that way. I'm just going to crack the bleeder screws open with an 11mm wrench. You're going to see that brake fluid is coming up out of it. This might be controversial for some, but again, the pads are junk, the rotors are junk. I don't care if I mar either one of them. I'm going to use 2 flathead screwdrivers to push the pads back, which is going to compress the pistons, which is going to put them into a completely collapsed state, which is where they need to be for the new pads to be installed. So the other bleeder kind of threaded itself shut with the hose on it, but it's okay. I still had one bleeder open, so the old fluid was being pushed out of the other bleeder, which is fine. I'm gonna close the bleeders. And this fluid is in really good shape. I mean, it's still clean, but my recommendation with brake fluid is I like to change it once a year, but the requirement is every 2 years. It's hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture over time, and you do not want moisture in your brake system. Before we get too far along, the front left side is going to have the pad wear sensor. So the warning that you get on your instrument cluster and your iDrive is going to be from this sensor here. Once it's triggered the first stage, that's when you kind of get a mileage countdown. And then once you've exceeded that mileage, the car just yells at you and then says you're overdue for service, et cetera, et cetera. But you can see how thin this inboard pad is. On this car, only the front left has a front pad wear sensor. There isn't one on the front right, so this is going to be the only thing that's different between doing the brakes on the front right, and that's going to be for most BMWs. So we're going to trace our pad wear sensor wire. It's going to come up here to this little box. So here's our pad wear sensor wire. The other wire is your wheel speed sensor. You don't want to disconnect that. You'll just disconnect it from the body connector, and then when we pull the pads out, we're just going to pull the pads out with the sensor connected to the pad. And when we go to install the new pads, we'll click a new sensor in. So now we'll take an E16 Torx socket and loosen our caliper bolts. These are one-time use per BMW, so we will discard these and we'll install new ones with the caliper once we're ready. And before we pull those screws out, if you follow the brake hose, it's held on a little bracket up here with a grommet. Just gonna pull that up and out. You'll see why in a second. Having that hose disconnected is going to allow us to position the caliper into a location where we can easily clean it and service it and swap the pads out. And it goes without saying, you don't want to let the caliper hang from the brake hose. So I have this, like I said, this bungee or there's caliper hooks. There's all sorts of ways you can suspend it, but that puts it off to the side. And fortunately for us, the rotor is not seized to the hub, so we can just pull it right off. And what I was saying about it being a 2-piece rotor, this hat's aluminum, this is iron, and it's riveted to the aluminum hat. So, the friction ring is magnetic, but the hub is not. So we're installing a 1-piece, and I'm doing that to see if it will fix some front brake rattle that I've noticed since I've gotten the car. I've had it a little bit over a year. It doesn't bother me. I know that it is the rotor making the noise, but I have a feeling the 1-piece rotor will resolve that issue. And honestly, aside from heat dissipation, which these will be a little bit better at, I don't think there's really a negative going to a 1-piece solid rotor here. All right, so I'm gonna pull out the old pads. So actually this is really good to show you. If you look at the old pad here, and you see the pad wear sensor, the pad wear sensor has been tripped. You can actually see the circuit has been opened. If you get in there real close, there's two little copper contact points. Those are normally connected internally. The rotor, as it's moving across, just basically open circuits that, and that's your indication on the dash. Now, there wasn't really too much left out of that. We got a decent life out of it. And there's a pretty large lip on the rotor too. I know under certain circumstances, you can have rotors turned, but I don't know if that's necessarily worth the effort. The rotor is going to be thinner, and the thinner the rotor is, the more heat it's going to hold. And I don't know. I've had rotors turned before, and you go back to getting vibrations relatively quickly, so not my preference. We do have some crustables we have to clean up here on our caliper. Just multiple years of buildup of brake dust and everything else from the environment. So we're gonna go under a flathead screwdriver and chisel some of this junk out of here. And we're gonna clean up the contact points on the caliper. Funny enough, these little clips where the pads sit, currently not available separately, which is unusual. But all we can do is clean this up as best as we can and get a lot of this crust out of here, which is, I'm gonna spend some time doing that. And then we'll hit it down with the brake parts cleaner, and we'll get the new pads installed. I think it was that saying that this pad shape is very peculiar, kind of unusual. I had to give you some directional arrows as a reference when you're putting these in. Which way is up? This is going to be the direction in which the rotor is traveling. This is the inboard pad. So this can only go in one way, obviously, but if you're not paying attention, I could see how you might be able to throw them in backwards. It's a little bit of a weird pad shape, very little pad material given the total size of the backing plate. And our inboard pad is going to have the little section on it for our pad wear sensor, which we're going to install now. These just pretty much clip in place like so. I'm going to throw this in. Now, you know, the $1 million question is here, you know, grease, no grease. I don't use grease on brake pads. I actually try to use as little lubrication as possible because it attracts dust that could potentially cause binding problems in the future. This is moving on some stainless steel hardware. I've cleaned that up as best as I can. If this was moving against, you know, really porous caliper material like a traditional floating caliper, you know, maybe some anti-seize or something like that. But when it comes to lubrication, once upon a time I used a lot of grease, or I greased a lot of things, you know, sliding pins, things like that. These days I really try to use as little as possible. And we'll just push the pad in so that it locks in place. And then we will do the same for the outboard pad. Next, we'll put our new brake rotor on the hub and install it with the set screw. Just reusing the old one is perfectly fine. Now, this is a coated brake rotor. As you can see, it's got a geomet or zinc coating on it, which prevents corrosion inside the box. Gone are the days of raw rotors with the Cosmoline rust preventative on it. Most rotors now are going to have this sort of grayish, silverish coating on it. You do not need to clean the rotor. The rotor is clean. You're good to go immediately. As soon as you go out to bed the brakes in, it's going to pull this coating off the friction surface. It's going to leave a coating on the non-braking surfaces, and that should help reduce corrosion in the future. So don't go crazy. You would need to use like multiple cans of brake parts cleaner to get all of this off, and there's no need to do it. So just leave it as it is. This is our new brake caliper mounting bolts. Like I said, one-time use only per BMW's instructions, so we're going to adhere to that. Torque spec on these caliper bolts is 130 Newton meters. Use a little bit of brake parts cleaner as lube for this grommet. Push it back into the bracket. We're going to take our pad wear sensor and we're going to start routing it and clicking it into the brackets it secures to. If you find that your new pad wear sensor doesn't line up with its little mounting grommets, you have the wrong pad wear sensor. And then you'll see the little sealing grommet here on the body side harness and on the new pad wear sensor. Those are going to click into these little grooves on the box, and that kind of seals it off and prevents, debris and stuff from getting in there. Wouldn't say it's watertight, but those are watertight connections, so they'll never be a problem. All right, now the rattle clip, we're going to slide in from the outside. And you'll kind of hear it click and lock into place. Should be equal on both sides. So because I had the bleeders open, I'm just going to take the box end of this 11mm, cinch them down. These do not have to be tight. They just need to be closed. Like, you don't need to jam them so that you round the head off. And then I like to take a towel that I wet with some brake parts cleaner and clean the bleeder screws down, and I'll just hit them with a spritz. The reason I do that is I don't want any of the residual brake fluid that's in the little bleeder there to make it look like maybe the bleeder is weeping. I'll do this every single time I do a brake flush as well. And of course, if you're doing a brake service on your car, changing your brake rotors, changing your brake pads, also a really good time to do a brake flush. Put some new brake fluid in the car. That is probably something that is not done enough on most cars. The brake fluid that came in this car is very clean. That's the way it should look. If it's brown and varnished, it means it's very old. And again, it's hygroscopic. You do not want moisture in your brake system. That lowers the boiling point. So there's a dry and wet boiling point for brake fluid. The more moisture in brake fluid, the lower the boiling point is. And there's nothing worse than hitting the brake pedal and not having it be there. Especially if you were towing or driving down a really long hill and you're riding the brakes a lot, brakes can get hot. So you want the cleanest, driest brake fluid in your system at all times. And it goes without saying that this little wheel pilot tool, which I did not mention during the tool section, very useful for lining wheels back up with the lug bolts and also supporting the weight of the wheel while you're getting them started. You're going to torque the lug bolts to 140 newton meters of torque on this particular car. And then once you have the car back down on the ground, you will want to pump the brakes before you drive. Because you've pushed the pistons back in, there is going to be a little bit of a gap there. The worst thing that's going to happen is you go to take the car for a test drive and bed in the brakes, and you hit the brakes and nothing is there. Pump the brakes every single time you touch calipers, anything like that. Make sure you have a nice firm pedal before you start driving with the car running. Once you know that you have a good pedal, you're free to drive, bed the brakes in, and you're good to go. But as you can see, not that many tools required to do this job. Really, any car, brakes are pretty simple. Not that many tools are going to really be required to do the job. Very straightforward. Only specialty thing I would say is the E16 torque socket, the catch bottles. But overall, this is something you can do in your driveway. This is something you can do at home. It's not that big of a deal. And like I said, since BMW is no longer covering brakes under warranty, even a newer car like this that's only 4 years old, you're going to have to take care of this. And those quotes from the dealers can be pretty expensive. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, drop in the comment box below. If you like this video, hit the like button. Of course, you'll want to hit subscribe. We have a lot of videos like this on the way. And as always, I'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.